which is like an 8-week course that's called Bridge to College Independence, where I have one track for the parents, one track for the teens. The thought process behind this is that the parent side usually carries more of that cognitive load, right? Being able to kind of remember doctor's appointments, medication if needed, the kind of follow up with teachers, all of these more executive functioning type things. But the parents are now throughout, middle high school, they've been in charge of it. Now, when we go to college, or what the next step is, it needs to transfer to the child. So, on the parent side of this program, I work on how to fade themselves out of these things. It's hard, but it is doable. So, kind of a stepwise process. And then on the teen side, being able to build these skills that set them up for independence. And that's really you need both sides to kind of build this ecological or this environment and this scaffolding. So you set each side up for success. And that's what I've been working on so far.
Perfect. So I guess my first question for you is what brought you to do this type of work in your life?
It's a great question. It seems like it's been a long journey. I was a kind of started being in the field of applied behavioral analysis. I worked as an RBT, did early intervention, so kids 18 months to 18, and becoming then a BCBA, which is a board certified behavior analyst. I was able the pass rate for this exam is like 40% the first time. So a little daunting, but I very thankfully passed it that first time with flying colors. And so I, got married that week as well. And so I then moved to Austin and my job was in Houston. So I was kind of driving back and forth. And it gave me a lot of time on that drive to really figure out, okay, now we've kind of, passed my board exam, got married. What are my steps now, kind of on a personal front as well as a professional front? That 5-year plan everybody talks about. What do I see? And I could, have lots of examples of in the field what this looks like, working up to being clinical director on a professional side, on a personal side. We were planning on kind of traveling for that first year and then having kids. And, I was like, okay, this plan, this works. To what we didn't realize was getting medical testing, one of the numbers, which is that AMH for fertility, it needs to be, closer to like zero point 0.1. And that checks like the amount of eggs that you have, your ability to have kids and have successful pregnancies. Um, Mine was, I got it back and it was like 0.001. So getting that news in a shared office space was not ideal. Took a lot out of me. Mentally to kind of wrap my head around this idea that, great, they're telling me that there's a very large possibility this is not going to happen at all, no matter what we do. So what does, now, how do I pivot now on a personal front? On a professional front, I was still working with early intervention, and it was a type of reflection to see me giving everything to my clients. And to a large part of my practice was also parent coaching or caregiver coaching. So, whoever is kind of that primary caregiver or that team for that child, being able to talk them through difficulties and, kind of how we overcome them, what needs to be done, how do we get everybody on the same page. And kind of dealing with my own personal stuff at the same time. So was very uncertain as to what this was going to look like. I got to kind of deal with that at the same time as COVID, which was not ideal at all. Being home with all of this, the state kind of canceling surgeries, going through rounds of IVF, and I really had no idea what this was going to look like. And so I talked to my husband and I started actually at my PhD program at that time because I was like, I need to just channel all of this somewhere. Something needs to come out of this where I'm putting in the effort and I'm getting the result. And personal life, with fertility and raising starting a family, it's not a clear path at all. And so kind of took that track. We did IVF, and luckily we did one of our transfers did take. And then I was pregnant with my son kind of coming out of COVID. And so that was a I want to say it's beautiful now looking back. It was definitely kind of the worst mental health that I've ever experienced at that time. But I'm glad I was able to use the science of like my field and behavior analysis towards myself, figuring out what my journey looked like, kind of adding in these little checkpoints of like, okay, we'll do X amount of surgeries and then we need to kind of regroup. I need to kind of have these like planned breaks, I would say. So that kind of took its course, and our son was born healthy, and kind of through that cycle of it, we then I was naturally pregnant with my daughter like 18 months later, and I was suddenly doing my PhD and then having two kids under the age of two. And it was a lot, I must say. I loved it. Two in diapers, that was a lot to to kind of deal with. But I realized I was kind of rebuilding my mental health and kind of figuring out the parenting style that worked for me, how I got help, how I adjusted my community, right? We come from two large families and kind of figuring out where everybody's kind of place is, how they could best help us to kind of continue the parenting style that we wanted and to continue our careers. What I was realizing as I was having my second, my son, there were just certain things that I kind of saw them as like red flags developmentally, things I had seen in my patients, things that I had read. Um, and the idea of like, oh, if you work with things enough, you're gonna see it, right? And you kind of see those things in your family. I was like, okay, let me just kind of track this and see how things are going. But he had severe low muscle tone throughout his mouth. So his mouth, his tongue, his cheeks. So he was, maybe even 10, 11 months up to like 17 months, he was still choking on water. Like he was having such a difficulty. We did the baby led weaning, we tried to figure out all these different things. But little things I had, work with speech pathologists. Luckily, I had built colleagues from different disciplines. And even if you put like syrup like on the side of his mouth, he couldn't reach it with his tongue. And it was definitely not for lack of trying, right? He had the motivation. He is very, very smart and trying to like more gross body things. So like I felt like he played soccer like from the womb. And so he was, very active, very on the going, could figure out like kind of logic puzzles, little things, can always do all that stuff. But eating was just did it nothing really worked, right? And because of the eating, then the digestive system and the sleeping, just kind of it was very, very difficult for us to get a schedule. So I tried to, in one of my sleepless nights, kind of got all of the speech pathology tools, and then was trying to like almost train myself to kind of use all these techniques, figure out what I can do with him. And it kind of, I had a major conversation with like speech pathologists with me, and they're like, this is one thing you need to like hand off, right? Like we need intensive therapy here. And we can work with this and moving forward in a certain direction. And so kind of along those same timelines, I'm realizing he has a lot of anxiety with social interactions, trying to figure out, okay, is this because of the COVID? Like what kind of like, along that same timelines, we didn't do a lot of socialization with what is happening. And we ended up seeing a developmental pediatrician, and I gave my notes and kind of wrote things down. And as I'm putting together my history, I'm realizing he's probably on the spectrum, high functioning, not a term I prefer, but clinically kind of makes things very clear. So he ended up getting diagnosed with Asperger's. And for him, it's specifically with the sensory processing disorder. So we've worked with a wonderful occupational therapist to handle those issues, whether it's been clothing or kind of the fine motor grip and kind of using utensils, all those type of things, and as well as the speech pathologist doing myofascial with his mouth. So I'm now, finishing my PhD, and I realize, I've now got a neurodivergent son. So there's no boundaries now with home and work. And it is definitely a challenge to figure out, there's no downtime, I would say. And so putting that together emotionally, I had to figure out, okay, how do I restructure things so that I can make sure I have enough like in my cup so that I'm not pouring from an empty cup. And so I've done a lot of, he's at a Montessori school right now, and I'm very fortunate that they let me kind of come in, kind of consulting, meeting with the teachers so that I'm building really a team. And I think that's the best thing I have seen from personal and professional perspective is that when you build that team, whether it's therapy wise, whether it's in the community, that's how you can uh that's how you can kind of almost like plan for that path to either whether it's success or happiness. And that's how you rebuild. That's how you're able to kind of pivot when things go maybe not according to plan, but now you've got a new plan you have to create. And that's what we're very fortunate to be able to do as we kind of see other things come up. We just pivot and we are able to shift what we're doing, what we're focusing on. And I know that we're not losing sight of things long term. And so, because of this, in the past year, as I've built, analyze, and act, I've started working more with teens, whether they're 12 and above now. So, I've worked with clients up to like 65, where a lot of this is focused on the independence and the skills that you can build. Because when there's skills, it's not just fate. Skills are something that you can plan, you can make progress of, you are in control of it, right? And so it definitely helps with the mental health, being able to separate things that you do have control with versus things that you don't. And being able to teach that independence and the skills and figuring out where there's gaps are, knowing, you figuring out what you don't know, which is a very hard concept to teach at any age, has allowed us to really kind of analyze that gap and then act upon it, which is how I came up with the name of the company, because that is the exact process that I take to problem solving.
A few things that you mentioned there is you mentioned that you passed your exam, you got married, so congratulations, because
Thank
that's
you.
the biggest first week, first month in the history of mankind,
Yes,
probably,
it was a
right?
lot.
It is a lot, right? So let's take a
Absolutely.
moment for that.
Thank
And
you.
then you're welcome. And then you had a child. After some struggles, you have this one. So that's the first blessing. Then you have a second child. That's a second blessing. You
Hmm.
figure out your child is neurodivergent because some of the signs were there, and then when you investigate it further, it came out. But you didn't love this child any less. When I heard you speak right now, it was enthusiastic. It was love. It was something. I have a bottle right here. If I could have bottled it and sold it, I would have at that point, right?
Oh.
Because they say life is like a roller coaster, right? Peaks and valleys. You have your ups and downs. And I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure you had your ups and downs, but looking back, you have all this love. When you take a moment and you take it all in, what do you feel? What do you want to share? Like, what are your thoughts looking back on everything that you've been through?
I felt like growing up there was a lot of fate phrase that a lot of people used, that, oh, God gives you what like God gives you difficulties that because he knows that you can handle it, right? And I kind of, as the roller coaster of life happens, sometimes that sentence is just a gut punch because you're like, I don't want to handle all of this, right? I don't want to be this strong. I don't want to have to deal with this. You almost wish that you didn't have so many difficulties, that life was more simple, right? And I feel like the way that I balance things out, because I'm certainly no saint, is to figure out what has the most, like what balls you can't drop, right? Like which ones are glass, which ones are, rubber or plastic. And so the things that are plastic, maybe it's, going out for a while, when eating was so difficult, we stopped eating with family, which culturally is not like food is so tied into our culture and our family that it really kind of, made people question us, and we weren't really ready for those questions or be able to explain it to a point where somebody else maybe could understand. Um, and so we just kind of had to drop that. We couldn't eat in public. We couldn't eat with family events. We would try to feed him, before and after, kind of all these type of things. It really limited our window on when and how we could do things. But the glass ball that we could not drop is that this is a skill. He can't, he's got to learn how to eat. He's got to learn how to be flexible. Textures were a problem. Culturally, eating food in different ways, having not just me feed him, right? I needed a break as well. So being able to kind of focus on that independence and being able to help him. I said, okay, this is a really like we have to really kind of map these skills. And again, my field of ABA, I'm so grateful. There's a process called task analysis where you take a big goal and you break it down into small goals. And so that's what we did. And I kind of did this collaboration between my husband and my mom. And then, went to school incorporating the teacher as well. I'm like, you can't, he does never did the airplane thing. You can't, kind of tease him and force him and be like, oh, I'm going to eat it before you. Because he'll just be like, okay, you can eat it. Like that, there's certain things like it's not universal. You have to figure out the right path to connect with that child. And so to me, looking back at all this, the way that I feel is that I have to find the right path to connection. That's the way I was taught from my parents and from my grandparents, the way you find a connection with somebody. Most people do it like more like on your peers or maybe with people that you respect or older than you, is that you've got to find that relationship, find the thing that connects you. I look at doing that also for children because they're not a one size fit all. Sometimes asking all the questions that either parents or like culture that family does, and you're like, oh, what are you playing with? What do you like? What's your favorite color? All these questions, if somebody's ability to communicate or their anxiety is coming through, all of that is so daunting, right? It just makes everything very, very heavy for them. So the approach I take, like personally as well as professionally, is I just meet them where they are. So whether that's playing on the floor with them, whether that's, walking and kind of just walking alongside them, we start to play I spy, we start to point things out. Like you're building that connection from like that first point of like a where you have a foot in the door, basically. And so I I grew up with like my mom looked at like every opportunity as a learning opportunity, which is wonderful. And we became sponges and she could always teach us on the go. And so I look at my kids and my life as okay, we don't need to, we're not trying to hit every single goal every single day. But we have some like top three priority things, right? Or really, there's like one experience I want to do. There's one thing that we're gonna like kind of really hone in on today and kind of just see that through multiple different opportunities. Where we actually we're up in Austin right now. And so the road trip, I mean, there's so many things that I got to kind of teach them. I spent the day with them while my husband was working yesterday. They got to work on their numbers, walking to the hotel room in the elevator, figuring out which floor when we're walking in the elevator, looking at the number, making sure we're getting off of the right floor, just kind of, all these like little things. There's so much learning around you that I just kind of have them focus really more on this independence because it teaches them a sense of pride. So almost like slowing down a little bit and building that time into our schedule that, okay, I'm not going to kind of rush you to do all these things because we have to do something or we have to be at a certain place. But I'm going to give you this time and I'm going to kind of coach you more of like, okay, this is the order. This is why we're doing this order. Let's see where you can kind of we can bring your skills up and have you be able to move things. And that teaches uh, as a parent, it lets you kind of step a little bit of a step back. And from the child's perspective, I see you start to like see their mind working, right? And I think that's the brilliance. That's what is so motivating to me is to see their mind moving and to see them kind of how they interpret different things. So that's what I know that was a very long answer to your question, but like I like to really look back and see that inspiration and that creativity that comes from that.
Radhika, they're here for you. They're not here for me. So the longer the answers you have, I'm pretty sure they're going to enjoy it because the beautiful thing, I think, and I spoke to so many parents, is when you become a parent, you have to see the world not only through adult eyes, but also through the child's eyes, right? Because you want to understand what they see. Because sometimes we will do something that may steer them in the wrong direction, even though we have good intentions. But if you say, okay, what is it that that child needs more so than what I need? And when you mention the little things and putting things in perspective, reminds me of a time where I was driving a family member to the hospital because they were sick.
Hmm.
And as I was driving, they were stopped at the red light, and there's these two kids. Like how kids are. They're running, they're smiling, they're giggling, everything. And then one of them falls, and you can see the adults go, the kids look at each other, they start to laugh, they get back up, they start running again. And to me, that was such an important part because here I am kind of sad. Here's my family member kind of down because I'm bringing them to the hospital. And we see these two kids who have fallen, just like how this person's health has fallen. They
Hmm.
look around, they get back up just as happy, right? That's like life showing you that even though something may be tough, you can still get back up, smile, and continue life going forward. When you were actually when you're going through what you're going through, the people that you're working with or just people in general, what are some
Hmm.
of the ways that you were able to pull yourself up and continue to run and continue to smile?
I always think about Simon Sinek's book, like the figuring out your why, so your purpose behind things. And when you have a purpose or a bigger goal, you can maintain that motivation, right? I think so. Kind of always keeping that front and center. When I work with these older individuals and their parents, I always start off my sessions talking about okay, what is our goal right now? So that we're almost like reconnecting, we're refreshing kind of like our buy-in, our consent of like what we're working on, what we're moving towards. The difficulty becomes when kind of life gets so um bogged down, so heavy that you've now lost your why, or your why changes, right? And you're not really sure what direction and where it is. So for me, I look at almost like a self check of trying to like plug myself back in and figuring out what is almost like the self care, right? So figuring out what is giving me joy, right? What is like, even if I'm so um so kind of hazy in my focus. What can I do easily? Right. And so through the IVF and the pregnancy, I was still working. I was doing telehealth, but I loved working. I had kind of pivoted and started working with some Medicaid clients, which in Texas, there's a Medicaid class waiver. So they changed it to 18 and above. And a lot of these clients were, boys they were probably about kind of early 20s, figuring out college, figuring out workforce and relationship, personal and professional. And I'm the oldest of four, and so the way that I worked with these clients was almost like channeling my like inner older sister, and so being able to connect in that way, so not coming from a very authoritative place, but more trying to figure out how to have this conversation and trying to almost expand their viewpoints. So, not just what I think, not just what they're thinking, but getting them to just be open to other experiences, other opportunities. And while I was doing that work, I realized this is growth mindset, right? This is what is truly allows you to, kind of build up that perseverance, that grit, is that you have to be open to experiences that may not be your comfort in your comfort zone, but to when your why is kind of lost, you need to be open. You need to be, kind of flexible in what you're in your thinking. And I kind of starting off with my sessions as well as kind of just as an icebreaker as well, I started playing the game, Would You Rather? And kind of adjusted it, per audience and per their preferences. But it was such a powerful and easy way to kind of start our sessions with that focus on a growth mindset, that it allowed them to hold on to that for the rest of our session. So I had one time start off with a client who was not, knew his perspective, and that's it. He did not want to hear something else. He did not want to take anything else in. And his goals were much bigger though, and be able to work in larger companies. And I was like, you've got to, like, you need to be able to hold other people's perspectives and see value in them to be able to have that working relationship as well. So we were playing Would You Rather, and I think I said it I said, gave the options of, like, would you rather have um, one cuisine for the rest of your life, or be able to travel for the rest of your life? And he was like, oh no, like I don't want, he started like giving me a lot of these, like, I don't want type of responses. Whereas, like, I think food should only be eaten with like a fork or spoon. And I'm like comfortable with like what I like. And I don't want to, like, experience other things. And I was like, okay. And so the way I play Would You Rather is that we pick, he picks the client, or the person I'm working with, they pick one thing, and then they have to almost like defend it, right? Explain it, why they're doing it. And I very purposely will try to pick the opposite answer so that I'm able to explain my perspective and kind of start to see a little bit of a shift. And so the way that I kind of pivoted at that for him was almost like trying to deal in the gray space, right? So I was like, well, you could travel and experience different foods, right? Or if you pick one food, right? Like if you do, I was saying, like Japanese food, then you have so many different ways that it can be done, right? Or if you pick technically American food also, if we're looking at the country of America, has lots of different cuisines because we're a melting pot. And so trying to kind of like figure out where the like gray area could be. And so I love being able to figure out, what new experiences can we then incorporate. For me, sometimes it's like listening to new music or watching different shows that, like, I never would have thought of watching before. um and being able to see like what it sparks within me, right? So where you can find that connection, with, like, we don't have as much time now with the kids, but prior to kids, it was like we during COVID, I got on the whole sourdough bandwagon. So kind of making, all these different things, the bagels, the doughs, the bread, the crackers, we did donut, all these type of things. But it's expanding your interest, and sometimes it's expanding your actions. It may not be like an interest yet, but it's just trying something new. And I think pulling it back to kids, that's what we do with eating, right? Like, we don't necessarily have our kids finish everything on their plate, but I do want them to almost like try one bite of at least two new food items that are there, right? Or something that if they don't like now, like, we'll take a bite. You don't know when your taste buds do change, right? Because your body, your taste buds for that matter, um your emotional regulation, so your strategies, the way that you process things, maybe the sounds, right? So music, things that you listen to, all these things are changing as you as an individual are changing. And so I love kind of being in the growth aspect and seeing where we can grow and really kind of reflecting on that.
You mentioned self-care and you mentioned learning about yourself. I took up boxing
Hmm.
during COVID. And one of the beautiful things that had helped me is that all my stress I put in that punching bag, right? We're in lockdown,
Hmm.
uppercuts. I'm stressed
Yeah.
out, left jab, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found out, because you mentioned activity as well, is I'm the type of person that if something is on my mind, it stays on my mind and I try to navigate it and maybe resolve it. And it's like busy work.
Hmm.
But when I was in the garage with my punching bag, it exhausts me to the point where I'm like, oh, what was I upset about again? S- Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah.
When someone comes to you, then could it then when maybe one of the obstacles be that self-awareness piece to understand what they love could be lacking or missing?
Absolutely. And specifically with neurodivergence, sometimes that prefrontal cortex is the least developed out of the brain, the brain like structure wise. And to be clear, that does not mean it cannot be developed. It's just currently not developed, right? And so there's just a lot more. You have to like almost teach that awareness. You have to teach like the executive functioning of being able to critically problem solve, to be able to have flexible thinking. So to be able to like analyze what's around you. Um, and I think that analyzing what's around you, not just your body for your body awareness, but also like in your environment, right? So one thing I always kind of connect it to is that like for body awareness, just to kind of define things so people know what we're talking about. Sometimes that very early on can just be the sense of like potty training, right? So being able to register, are you hungry? Do you have to go to the bathroom, right? Are you sleepy? So being able to identify the body, how your body is feeling with different emotional states as well as different like physical states and being able to connect that. Now, the emotional regulation and the tools come in as then, okay, there's some strategies, if people are like really frustrated, kind of you're talking about, and you can't kind of slow your mind or you can't put things out of your mind, you need to physically get it out, right? So we have a lot of people doing a lot of sports. So running, for younger kids, they do a lot of like trampolines, a lot of, soccer is really great, basketball, things that are like fast paced, that they're constantly in motion, helps them be focused on what's like physically present, right? Grounding strategies, all of that is connected. But if you take them like in school or, say in a restaurant and they get frustrated or they can't focus, you have to have a different strategy, right? You can't do boxing, you can't do running around, you can't do jumping at school or in a restaurant. So you've got to figure out something else, right? And so that's where the emotional regulation kind of skills come in is okay. Grounding is a concept, right? How you connect body awareness, maybe proprioception, interception, but it needs to be tailored to that context. So, like at a restaurant, when we take our kids, we still have a diaper bag, and it's really just an activity bag at this point. It's like tangrams, it's sticker books, it's coloring things, but these things where it keeps their mind and their body engaged on a specific task because they have to be seated. So you think of like how to keep a kid engaged in an airplane. They can't go anywhere else. So they've got to stay there. So what are the tools that we use then, right? People have stuff on the sticker. I learned that construction blue tape, that was in my bag for at least 4 years because it doesn't leave a mark in anything. And kids think it's hilarious. So you could do this, all their different crayons on there. We can like kind of like hide animals and put them on stuff and they're trying to work on that fine motor and pull it off. But even just that ripping sensation, right? That's appropriate. It's not making that big of a mess, but it's allowing that body awareness, doing something productive with your body and your mind helps regulate you, right? And feeling that sense of calm, that's what allows you to almost like refresh. And when you're talking about that like reset, that's how you can like create those opportunities of reset.
The way you describe that, that could be something that neurodivergent children or individuals, as well as everyone else, should
Hmm.
be doing.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of, the strategies, they don't really differ from neurodivergent to neurotypical, right? And I say that because neurodivergent is such a wide range. And diagnosis wise, if we're looking at the medical model, it's about severity, right? But when you're talking about mental health and strategies, if it's the same symptoms, it can be the same like solution or same strategy. And so and this kind of tied back into why I wasn't so um I would say depressed. I wasn't as depressed as I've seen other families be when I got the diagnosis about my son. Because to me, the diagnosis, I've never, you know, taught to a diagnosis or given advice based on the diagnosis. To me, the diagnosis is more of a almost like a backing of giving you access to community, to funding, to resources. It is not a glass ceiling. It just brings awareness, almost like with some evidence as to where there are these gaps. So you can then start to build these skills, or know where the limitations are, these skills are, so you can figure out accommodations or like assistive technology adaptations around that.
When it comes to the importance of community or the support system around you, especially as you're raising children, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, how important is that community?
So I say that that community is it's kind of like your true key to success, right? Your true way to make or break your potential. For us at this point, community, we have family, and we've got four generations. We're very grateful, from my kids to my grandparents. And not everybody may be on the same page as we are with the pathology, with the neurodivergence, but everybody, kind of blood wise, has a relationship and has a connection that they'd like to give. And for me, that is the green light to adding them to our community, because there's that, it's unconditional love for that child. That safety is there. Sometimes I have to kind of check for that psychological safety just on what the words people say. And my son takes it very personally. The comment of, oh, quickly put on your shoes, otherwise you'll get left behind. That's a common thing people say to kids, but for my son, it sets him off like that. He truly thinks, oh no, that's the fear of now being completely isolated because I can't quickly get on my shoes. It's overwhelming. So to kind of maintain psychological safety, I do give a lot of feedback on what things should be said around him. Um, but the community, I've been we started off very small, from even when we couldn't kind of eat around other people, but we've been kind of growing our community, people who's, the kids are inclusive in their behavior, their parents and the way that they parent. The language is very inclusive. I love one of my sister-in-laws had the comment that, every family parents differently, or every family looks different. And that is so simple, but so powerful. And I feel myself saying it all the time when there's different questions. Um, but it also allows inclusion, right? It allows you to see, okay, well, yeah, we're different. We all love each other, though. That's never been in dispute. We do things differently, right? Right. And so whether it's, some parents may work, some parents don't work, some people, some, cousins, they have siblings. Some do not, right? So the way that the kids look at things is very important to me. But from the parenting perspective and the adults that are in my kids' life, I'm very focused on how they interact with them and making them feel included and really bring a sense of belonging. And I think if I can, the more the more areas, whether it's, kind of school friends, whether it's the teachers and the activities, we just did baseball, we're doing swimming, kind of all these things, the more areas and opportunities I see where my kids are safe and they have a sense of belonging and they're growing, um, that's how we're building the community.
Nothing is more beautiful than the smile of a safe child, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of my friends has a neurodivergent child and she shares the journey. And I remember she shared about community and having the support system, as you described, where it started off small, then it expanded, then it shrank a little bit again. And one of the struggles that she shared, now that I'm remembering it, is she felt a sense of shame and guilt. And I asked her about that because her and I have that relationship. And she was like, Turian, part of it was in my own mind because maybe I did something that caused my child to be this way. Another one was that there's some people that just didn't want to be around. That I could see. I do know I'm old enough to remember that there's some diseases out there. People thought that if you looked at them, that you would get it.
Yep,
Right?
yep.
Right. So, I know HIV was a big one. Like, if you just looked at someone who had HIV, you'd get it too.
Mhm.
So as she was sharing that, I began to realize I was like, wow, it could be so isolating trying to raise a child, as you pointed out, with this unconditional love, there's people around you whose love is conditional.
Mhm.
How do you help people, maybe either yourself or others, understand and maybe handle any shame or guilt that may come from internally or externally in their journey?
So I will say that shame and guilt that affects me personally the most with kind of the roller coasters of life. I think there's so many things as a female, as a mom, as a working mom. There's so much shame and guilt that you kind of perceive from like externally and then you internalize it, right? No one has ever actually said these things to me, I will say, but they're almost like inferred from the way people do things, right? Parenting groups, online at the playgrounds and play groups, or across family, right? You kind of have the like stages of childhood, right? So like, as they're toddlers and babies, and you start getting to like, elementary and you do sports or you start doing school and you're looking kind of at this next phase. I definitely have had a lot of shame, not necessarily shame, but a lot of guilt because the way that the what I have to focus on for my child based on where his skills are, it's not in the same bucket, right? Even, coming back to food, there's the idea that, I grew up with, my mom made one dish and everybody ate that. And we grew up with like, okay, need to get a happy plate. You need to finish everything that's on your plate. And so there was a lot of, kind of shame not being able to maybe eat with adults. For a while, it was just so difficult for my son to eat. And we had the baby too. And so I was like nursing and feeding her as well. We did a lot of screens. And so that's a very hot topic for a lot of people. For my side of the family, we were raised with, my dad's a doctor, and so we didn't have a lot of quantity of time. So what we had was quality, and it was very targeted around the meals. And it was, meals are family time that you have conversation, you kind of reflect, right? It's a social engagement. And so I was then realizing as I had my son, oh no, eating super super difficult. Social engagement, super difficult. Conversation, this is his worst nightmare. Like this is just the perfect storm. And so kind of having to temper my shame and guilt around, oh my God, now I'm a like screen parent. And I'm like, okay, but again, taking it back into like behavioral terms, okay, this is the most difficult environment for him. And we're trying to kind of build understanding, especially for my daughter, that like, we do still do things as a family and we're all together. So we do try to eat all at the same time. We go to restaurants, we go to different places. But the only time he gets to watch, and then we'd made them all educational things. Or he loves, fixed interests. So I know a lot about sharks, dinosaurs, trains, all these things. So he wanted to, he's watching the history of like the evolution of dinosaurs. That's what he's watching. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine. If he's watching that, and if that almost likes him not resist me feeding him, and if he's more flexible now to trying things, if we're watching things, there's a little bit of a give and take, right? So I had to realize that, we're making progress. And when I see this progress that he's doing, I'm able to really kind of almost like squish and like eliminate that shame and guilt. Because at the end of the day, progress is what I'm looking for. And sometimes, or all the time almost, that shame and guilt takes away our opportunities. It takes away opportunities for us to, be in new environments, for us to have that community and connection, and even for us to kind of do things that give us self-care. I've recently been traveling to promote kind of not only my company, but then also my research I did for my doctorate. And there was a lot of kind of shame and guilt in that for me, being able to leave as a mom, being away for a few days, taking that time for myself, maybe staying for like the social event, not just flying in that day, flying back, right? And I'm very fortunate that my husband, one, is able to manage things with his schedule, but then also has the heart and the mind to say, I've got this. And we live 5 minutes from my parents. So he's like, if I don't have this, right? Like we have backup systems, we have a community, the kids know whether you're there or not, they've got all that love. And we talk about very honestly, like what we're doing. Like even right now, my kids are at lunch and they're like, why can't you come? And I said, well, I'm talking about what I've learned, right? And I want to share it with other families so that maybe it's something they would like to learn as well, or something that will help them, learn through difficulties. So kind of being very transparent so that nothing is kind of in their mind. And my goal is to really eliminate their shame and guilt that will ever hold them back. And if I can do that, that will be my biggest mark of success.
Your adaptability, you and your husband, is courageous and should be commended because I've seen some people adapt to their child, and then I've seen some people say that no, the child has to adapt to me. It's like work, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's had a bad boss,
Yeah.
right? And one of the signs of a bad boss is that I'm not going to adapt to my team. My team has to adapt to me, even though you're managing all these different personalities. So the fact that you and your partner can take on these different hats
Mm-hmm.
and then switch them. And then, as you mentioned, there may be some sign of shame and guilt, but you're working through it. Someone that I spoke to, I want to say last year, gave me this example of you see those street performers and they're spinning plates, right?
Yes.
So one plate would be my child, one would be
Yeah.
me, one would be my husband, one would be my wife, right? And you're spinning all these plates and you're making sure that none of them break and none of them crash,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like anyone, how many plates can you spin before something does break, something does crash?
Yeah.
When it comes to your own regulation, what are some of the ways that you do that?
This is definitely where I am still a big work in progress, I will say. I have learned that journaling, really kind of taking things out of my mind, putting them in writing, that helps me reflect, and that it helps almost like shorten the highs and lows so that we're at a healthy even part. And so I've kind of adapted kind of that journaling to then also now the way I promote stuff, and kind of share advice with my company on social media, talking about the skills that I'm talking, I'm working on, and my blog, and how I publish it. But then also, what am I doing now at a personal level, right? And so how I'm connecting all of that. So I've been an interesting experience the past few months, learning to now take my journaling and reflection and put it with my daily, connecting my personal and my professional area of expertise as well. I also think that you almost need like a certain level of like depersonalization. And so I feel like for a lot of people, that's where it comes in with the like doom scrolling and binge watching. And so for me, I try to make it productive with my hands or like with my body if I need to zone out mentally, right? So that could be the organizing. There's an idea of, if it's your clean space, you've got a clean mind. That I've always taken to heart. And so organizing for me is looking more at like our area and our home as like systems. So, as the kids have gotten older, now we do a whole, my daughter with her hair and my son's giving himself his own shower. We like redid our system in the bathroom so they can do almost like 90% of it independently. The system, in our pantries, we put their snacks and what they can easily grab either for breakfast or, those type of things. They're at lower part, and so they can get it themselves, their plates and dishes, so that we can give it to them. They can put them away, or when we're eating, they can take stuff out. So for me, it's looking at systems. And so when I kind of depersonalize, I kind of zone out, whether it's on social media or watching things. In the back of my mind, I'm also kind of looking at what are other people's systems when they're talking about things, when they're doing stuff on the on shows. I've realized I like a lot of like not necessarily drama, but shows where it has like multiple storylines, and you have all maybe like everybody's connected in some way or another. And it makes me think about all these different like personal interactions and which ones are healthy, which ones are not, but kind of like, oh, that I need to make sure we do not look like that, right? Versus like, oh, they've got a really great way that they're, at the end of the day, reconnecting before they go to sleep. Like that's something that we should do. We should try to make time for that because that seems to be valuable. Um, so I like to depersonalize and kind of get inspiration. Um, but to me, the cycle of how you have a conversation is so important. And that gives me closure. Like I can't go to sleep angry. I can't go to sleep with like all these difficulties. I've got to write it out. I've got to figure out like my way through something. And unfortunately, that does lead to a very little amount of sleep. So trying to work on that. But and I the way I've kind of integrated a lot of like anxiety with that understanding of anxiety at that as well is that you need a conflict resolution, right? Once you get to that conflict resolution, then you feel peace. You can be grounded. It's hard to preach all these grounding and emotional regulation tools when there's like, fires burning all around you. It's just not realistic. So and because my son has a lot of anxiety that pops up at different things, specifically for sleep, um, I really try to focus on when you're having a difficulty or failure comes up or disagreement comes up, in that same breath, you figure out how to repair out loud, not in your head. And this is definitely something that we're trying to do. My husband and I are trying to do a lot more in front of the kids. Just you can't just like you can't pretend problems don't happen. Problems are going to happen. The point of life is to get through the difficulties, to get through the problems. You can't just not have any problems. So when they do happen, how do you repair? How do you keep going forward? And so sometimes that's being humble, being able to admit what part was your responsibility, what part you have accountability on, what could we do different next time? So I have like almost like a formula for apologies that I've worked on with my kids, and I try to practice what I preach as well. So, it starts off with being able to like acknowledge somebody else's perspective. So like if my son is just moves very fast. And so sometimes it's, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I, knocked you over, or those type of things. Being able then to repair. Sorry, one second. But so like checking into that person, seeing their perspective, then kind of acknowledging the situation, right? I was moving, I didn't realize your body was there, and I tried to quickly get past you. Are you okay? And then just talking about what you can do differently, right? I should slow down. I should make sure there's enough space when I'm moving in that direction, right? And so that's something that I've taught the kids, but then now realize I'm trying to do it in every aspect of my life. And that gives me a lot more grounding and a lot more peace as well.
Perfect. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's something that we all can learn from because in these days, we're all so busy, so many distractions, and we sometimes forget ourselves while we're caring for everything else. And sometimes the things that we even care about in the long run, we're like, did I really put that much energy into that? I could have taken that energy, put it into myself. One
Hmm.
final question, Radhika, before I let you go. I want to give you three wishes for this
Hmm.
question. What are three things you wish people knew about the path to happiness and why?
That's a really good question. I would say to that path of happiness, I would say the first thing is happiness is not always a mark of success. I would say that because I think especially with like parenting and with kids, sometimes when you're so busy trying to make somebody happy, you're missing some opportunities for them to grow. And that success comes from some failures do teach you a lot more than being happy. So having those opportunities is not always going to look happy throughout the process, but the reflection, that's maybe where you get that happiness. So that would be my first thing. My second thing I wish people knew about happiness is kind of pulling in a lot of faith. But you everything happens, I would say, for a reason. And that's very, very difficult to look at when you're going through trauma and going through pain. Um, but I think pain and trauma, it brings out more of your why. It helps you sharpen your focus, sharpen your creative instincts. It really brings out the individuality of yourself. And I think that's authenticity, and that's what we're constantly craving for, and that's what kind of, in my mind, defines people's success is that them being authentic. Um, and let's see, a third one I would say about happiness is looking for those growth opportunity, the growth mindset, like opportunities. So exploring something, whether it's new music, it's a new activity, maybe it's a different, it's somebody that you maybe wouldn't necessarily be friends with or wouldn't reach out for. Um, when you're able to show happiness by doing things a little bit differently, I think that's how we become more accepting and more in a community that focuses on inclusion. Because you don't need to always know where somebody comes from. You can just kind of spark somebody else's happiness by having